Well, Stories from the Road is back. The other day, somebody asked me if anyone had ever passed away in my arms. Here's the story I told them. As public servants, we amass a stockpile of stories, experiences, lessons. Some of them are happy, some of them are heroic, some are sad, some are just memories we'll never forget. This story falls into the sad category, but with a little lesson at the end, I think. Now, in order to protect the innocent, I'm going to be vague on some of the details for obvious reasons. I'd hate for a family member or somebody to stumble upon this video and recognize the finite details of the story. So this story took place, I'll give a range. I was on the job, let's say from 11 to 15 years. I had pretty good amount of experience. I felt pretty comfortable in my skill sets. And on this day, it was a pretty hot day, I was patrolling an area and a call comes out over the radio. And immediately the details are pretty dark. And let me back up a little and just tell you beforehand, in full disclosure, not everybody involved in this story makes it out. But anyway, resuming the story, the call comes out on the radio of a motorcyclist versus a big rig. And you don't need law enforcement training to kind of formulate an opinion of who is going to get the better end of that equation. Now, this call wasn't on my beat. However, I was very close to where this incident occurred. And so it only took me a minute maybe to arrive on scene. And sure enough, it was exactly as it was described. A motorcyclist had pulled out like perpendicular into a big rig. And I ran up. The big rig driver was already out of his truck, and mentally he was in pretty bad shape for obvious reasons. And I ran up to the motorcyclist, and he was situated in not a good way in relation to the big rig. I'll spare you the details, but in my mind, with all this experience I had amassed, I knew that this person was not long for this earth. And as I ran down and knelt down beside him, I could see his face. He had, I just remember seeing his face. I don't know if he was able to pull his face shield up or what, but suffice it to say, I could see his face. And from the moment my knees hit the ground, and I'm this close to him, all he kept asking me was, am I going to live? Am I going to live? Frantically over and over. And remember, in my head, by this time, I had seen quite a few things and knew that based on any medical training I could have had, in my mind, there was no way I was going to save this person. And so what I did was I clutched his hand. He had gloves on. I didn't, but I clutched his hand. And I said, "You're going to be all right, brother." Now, I don't know if that's verbatim a quote. What I do remember specifically is that I called him brother. And I had a tone of reassurance. So I said something along the lines of, "You're going to be just fine, brother," or "You'll be okay, brother," something like that. And the countenance on his face immediately changed from panic to almost clarity, maybe not really joy, but like a weight had been lifted off of him. And moments later, I believe he passed. And within a few more moments of this occurring, the ambulance and the fire department had arrived on scene, and they asked me what was going on, and I said, I think he's gone. And they knelt down, and a few moments later, they confirmed that, yeah, he was gone. Now, around this time, my beat partner, whose beat this incident had occurred on, he arrived on scene, and I had stood up, and if I'm being honest, I was kind of in a little bit of a daze. Sometimes you have those days where things get sprung on you and you're not exactly ready. I mean, who could be ready for such a thing? And so I was mentally, I was in a very odd place. And so my beat partner arrives, and he asks me, something along the lines of what's going on. And I remember I pointed out the big rig driver, and I said, he's in bad shape. He's perfectly fine physically, but mentally, he's not in good shape. He's sad, he's panicked, he's excited. And then I indicated towards the ground where the motorcyclist was, and I said, they just pronounced him. He was alive when I arrived, but he's since passed away. And then I remember specifically, he asked me, well, did he say anything? And I looked at him, and I asked him, well, what do you mean, did he say anything? And to my surprise, this other officer, who was much newer than me, if I had 11 to 15 years on. Now, in my head, I know exactly how much time I had on, but for purposes of keeping this story a little bit vague, I'm using a range of 11 to 15 years on the job. This officer had fewer than 5 years on the job. And he asked me, well, what I mean is, or he told me what I mean is, did he say how fast he was going? Did he give you his license? Did he say if he had insurance for the motorcycle? And I remember looking at him in just amazement and shock and embarrassment, because his question was so absurd to me, in that I had just held this man's hand moments before he left this earth. And so the reaction of this other officer, it angered me. And so I replied with, no, he didn't. Of course he didn't say anything about his insurance or what direction he was traveling or his shoe size or what he had for lunch or any of these just meaningless details. And I remember I raised my voice to him, and he asked me, well, what did he say? And I told him, he kept asking me over and over if he was going to live. And I told him that he was. And the other officer, again, to my surprise, reacted not with the way I thought he would or should react, but instead then began to accuse me of lying to this motorcyclist, saying, well, the last thing he ever heard was a lie, because obviously he wasn't going to be all right. And I remember I yelled at this officer in kind of like this self-righteous, offended way. And I remember telling him, no, I didn't lie to him. I gave that guy hope. I knew he wasn't going to make it. And so the last thing he ever heard was hope. And then a few minutes later, another officer arrived to help out, and the officer whose beat this incident was on approached the second officer and right away told him, hey, this guy lied to the guy right before he passed away. And again, I overheard this, and I again said, no, I gave that guy hope. And if I'm honest, it made me mad. And I left as quickly as I could. Obviously I helped out and did my duty, but at the earliest moment, I left because I didn't want to be I don't want to be around, I guess, that energy or that mindset. And so, yes, sad story, obviously a sad story. And as public servants, again, we have that stockpile of experiences and memories and things that, I guess, in my mind, unless you do a job like this, you probably will never experience those things, or you have a highly, highly diminished chance of experiencing those things. And in a way, I envy that. But in another way, I reckon that if this guy, who's long gone now, only had moments left on this earth, what did I want him to hear? If he was going out no matter what, how was that stage going to be set? And, ask yourselves, if you had been in that unfortunate situation, what would you have said? Would you have asked him for, if he has a valid license with a motorcycle endorsement? Would you have been that robotic person stuck to the script of presumably investigating this incident? Or would you transitioned into a humanitarian role and essentially given this guy a blessing on the way out? Dear friends, don't ever lose sight of the fact that we're human beings doing this job. Unlike other careers, and this is not to devalue other ones, but we don't go out working on inanimate objects. We're not repairing televisions or computers or hooking up cable, which are great jobs as far as I'm concerned. We deal human to human. And in that correlation or that equation, I'll tell you, wonderful things can happen, dynamic things can happen, scary things can happen, fearful things can occur. But it's up to us to hopefully never forget that in those equations of human with human, not human versus human, but human with human, that we are the professionals. We are the ones that come to the table with myriad training, lots of experience, and an edict of helping others. Be ready to ask the person very scripted questions when you're doing an investigation. But I'll tell you what, also be ready to completely flip that switch and to be a whole human being full of grace, full of charity, and most importantly, full of love. I know this video was a bit heavy today, but I'm excited to share some stories from the road with you. Not stories just for the sake of telling stories, but stories that have a lesson or a meaning or something that we can extract out of it so that you can be better at your job. And when you have those human to human occurrences, you'll be better prepared, you'll be more effective, and you'll be the best public servant you can be. I hope you're getting something out of these videos. Please like and subscribe. I bid you all peace. Now let's get out there and get that work done.